Hello, and welcome to the Genius of series. I'm Hilary Viner, CEO of Genius 100 Foundation. On behalf of the extraordinary Genius 100 team, founder Rami Kleinman, Global Ambassador Ido Aharoni, and Chief Community Officer Helen Hatzis, thank you so much for making the time to join us, either for the first time or again for this very special Genius 100 event. We're delighted and honored to see so many Genius 100 visionaries and members of the Genius 100 community from so many places around the world. And it's great to see so many students joining us today from all over the world, including American University, NYU, and of course, IDC Herzliya. We're thrilled to kick off our brand new Genius of series. It exemplifies that we, as an organization, are inspired by Einstein to bring together accomplished, compassionate minds to reimagine the future and improve our world. Starting today and continuing monthly thereafter, the Genius of will highlight one or more of our illustrious, world-renowned G100 visionaries. This brilliant group is composed of global leaders, activists, innovators, and influencers, of which 16 are Nobel laureates, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The discussion that will begin in just a few minutes will be focused on the life and work of G100 visionary Dr. Amir Amedi. But I just have to say, on a personal note, it is a special honor for me to kick off this extraordinary series profiling Amir and his conversation with Ido, as it was 5 years ago that I was first introduced to Genius in Montreal at the insistence of Ido, my lifelong friend and collaborator, and the very first friend I made was none other than Amir Amedi, as he instantly captivated me with his brilliance. On that note, here's the rundown for today. Dr. Amedi and Ambassador Ido Aharoni are going to have a one-on-one chat on the extraordinary work of Dr. Amedi. We will be fielding questions from the audience at the conclusion of Ido and Amir's conversation. So please don't forget to submit questions via the Q&A option located within your Zoom panel. At the conclusion of the Q&A, I'll be back to close things out and share some heard it here first special announcements. And we have a lot to share today. So please don't leave at the end of the Q&A. So without further ado, here are Ambassador Ido Aharoni and Amir Amedi.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for your great introduction. It's such a pleasure to host again another Genius 100 event. Those of you who are first timers, just for you to understand, the Genius 100 community is not necessarily a community of geniuses, although we do have people like Amir Amedi, but it is a community that gets together in order to celebrate the inspiration of Albert Einstein, who is the genius. And Albert Einstein's story can empower and should empower every person around the world. I know I have some of my students on this call, and they've heard from me the whole story about Brent Einstein. I just wanted to acknowledge the presence of Manette Malevsky, our fearless leader from Montreal, and Rami Kleinman, the dear friend and the founder of Genius 100 from Toronto. Also here with us, I must mention her, is my dear friend Fern Oppenheim, who was with me 20 years ago when we started building the strategy for Israel as a brand, which Albert Einstein was a big part of it. And thankfully today there's a museum being built in Jerusalem, and we're here to celebrate really innovation, creativity, and the importance. This is really based on the acknowledgement that creativity is the most significant human asset today in today's world. I'm so pleased to share today's program with my dear friend and a hero to many of us, and that is Amir Amedi, who is the pride of the Amedi clan. The Amedi clan is a very famous clan in Israel. He is the pride of his hometown, Jerusalem. He is the pride of his university, Reichman, and before that Hebrew U, and before that Harvard. He is the pride of Israel and soon to be the pride of humanity. I believe so. So he's the head of the Amedi lab at Reichman University. And here today, we are going to devote the next 35, 40 minutes to discuss his scientific work. But before that, you have to tell us a little bit about your background because it's so eclectic. Tell us about your childhood in Jerusalem, about your interest in music and how it all converges into your scientific work.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here among friends and people that I really not only appreciate but also love and like. My background was I was actually born in a very unique house that was 1.5 rooms that hosted my father and his 14 brothers and sisters. So it was like in India, you know, where you put the mattresses in the end of each night, and so you have a bit of space. And was like raised in this neighborhood later in the kind of a tough neighborhood, and somehow education was always the escape. So it was great fun. And when I was kind of becoming like in the army, and after that starting my career, I was kind of confused what I want to do. You know, one thing, I played basketball in Apol Jerusalem, so that's one love that me and Ido shares, NBA, but it was very clear very soon that I'm not going to be the next Jewish Michael Jordan. Talent and hate side, yeah, and then I was kind of couldn't decide between being a musician, a jazz musician. I loved playing the saxophone, lots of passion, not so much lots of talent, but I was trying to see if this is what I'm going to do in my life. And the second big dream I had was to be a scientist. Yeah, I was actually not sure that I want to be a brain scientist. I wanted to be a marine biologist way before Seinfeld, you know, had this famous episode, you know. And after that, everybody thought I just made up this dream because of the Seinfeld and George episode. And it was one of these rare combination of events that led me into neuroscience. It involved, first of all, so I started to study biology, and at the same time at the music academy, and I said I will give it 1 year to see where my passion and my talent goes. And in the end of and then I dragged it for another year, and then I saw a show in the jazz festival in the Red Sea, which is an amazing festival on the harbor, some kids playing, and I realized like, you know, maybe I should focus on the sciences where I was a bit more talented. And then one day you know, in the end of my second year, I was abroad in Greece on a very cheap flight, you know, the ones that at the time they could change for you the return ticket. And I returned 1 day before, ahead of time, because they changed my date. And I went to the university, saw there a girl that I really like, and I just went to pay, you know, the tuition and stuff. And she was like, you here for the new program they opened in Hebrew U, which was amazing because they selected only like 10 students and 10 professors to try and create the first program in Israel for undergraduate in neuroscience. And I was like, no, I want to be a marine biologist. But in the end, she convinced me to come and try to register to the interview. And honestly, I only came there because I wanted to spend some time with her. But somehow after 2 weeks of lectures on this very intimate scenario, I was like so amazed. You know, everything I listened and learned was so fascinating to say, okay, this is it. Finally, no more hesitations, no more deliberations. This is what I want to do in my life. So that's a little bit about the background.
Now, naturally, your work is focusing on the senses, and obviously, as a musician, this has a special meaning to you. So, what was the first link between the senses that you started researching?
Well, when I started researching, and to big, you know, even today, this is the big majority. You have a lot of specializations in science. So you know, how vision scientists come and meet and discuss vision, and we think that there is like all the 30% of the back of the brain do vision, and the hearing, you have language and you have speech. And so when I just started my first year in the direct PhD in computational neuroscience, I was hiking, and in the night I was like looking for my flashlight, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm you know, when I'm looking for this flashlight, I'm using my sense of touch without vision, and I kind of put my vision together with my touch. And then everything, and then it's kind of struck me that all the important things in life actually involves several senses. So for example, we used to think about reading as something visual and language as something that you hear, right? But actually, if I'm going to play to you at the same time how the shape of your mouth and the sound, you will hear the visual, what the vision tells you, and not the hearing. So kind of, and all the meaningful things in life, you know, lunch, going to swim to the sea, kiss, are all multisensory. So how come people don't study how we interact and combine information between the senses?
So you did something that was interdisciplinary within brain research. Can you give us, like, in less than a minute, you know, brain 101, the structure, the functions, where everything is, so that we will understand the lay of the land?
Cool. So let me share my screen and see if I can share with you this presentation. For some reason, I don't see it right now. Let's give it another second. Yeah, here it is. Sorry about the Hebrew, but it's the brain doesn't change according to the language. So you see here on the left side, the two people that contributed the most to understanding of this division of labor and how the brain is organized, Yuval and Wiesel, which won the Nobel Prize in '81. And basically one-on-one, we are thinking that about, or this is still the textbooks today, the 30 back, first of all, the number of neurons in the brain is, roughly speaking, the numbers of stars in our Milky Way galaxy. So it's a huge number of neurons, 10 in the 12. And it's, the common wisdom is about the 30% of the back of our brain dedicated to vision. And here we recognize faces and tools and read and body language and colors and so on and so forth.
That's in the brown. That's the brown color. That's the
no. That's the green. The green color. The 30%, right, which is the back. Yeah.
All right.
So this is yeah. And then the purple part is music, is language, and so on and so forth. The yellow part here, which actually plays a very interesting part in Einstein's brain story, post-mortem death story, it have basically two functions. One, it have a replication of your body. There is what is called in Latin homunculus, which is a little man in the brain in Latin. So basically there is a map, a very detailed map that we used, for example, in 2012 to map very accurately, even like in digits resolution. And you can even look in break activity and ask a person to imagine moving the hand or being touched somewhere, and we can tell based on this map's activity what you are thinking about. Okay.
So this is the part, the yellow part is the part where imagination happens.
Well, no, the yellow part is where touches happen, but also in addition, it's have in the more posterior part a more complex functions. It can deal with imagery also, yeah. But the common wisdom is that we imagine things in the same location where we perceive them. So if I'm going to visualize something, then I'm going to do it with my green part. And if I'm going to visualize you hugging me, it's going to be in the yellow part. yeah? And or if I'm going to imagine one of the stuff we found in the lab, if you are going to imagine your body in relation to 3D space, then it's going to be in this yellow part, yeah, but in more posterior part of it. And then the pink part is the movement. So if you think about it, what we know to do in the brain is to receive input in the 5 senses, or to have output, which is our movements, yeah? So I can move my hands, but I can also move my tongue, and this is language. And also there is what in the middle, where there is basically what makes us human is all what in the middle, yeah? Yeah, it's what we do with all this information. Between stimulus and response, in the middle, there is memory, there is thinking about the past, thinking about the future, planning, experiencing emotions, and so on and so forth. So a lot of it also happen in all this part that is not with colors, yeah, all this most anterior part of the brain.
That's what's called the visual cortex.
The most posterior part is the visual, and then all this part that is not with color is the prefrontal cortex, the most anterior part. So we'll go vision, sound, touch, body movements, and then language, planning, and all these high-level functions.
Now, a question.
So that's 1 minute, very crude 101.
Yeah.
Although what I found
before we move on, let me just ask you a question that everybody's curious about. There was a research that you shared with us a couple of years back here in New York about that was conducted on Einstein's brain, and they found that one part of his brain was unusually enlarged. Which part was that?
Right. So a little bit of cautionary before I dive into the details, which are extremely fascinating. We did not have a chance to study Einstein's brain with the very powerful methods we have today to map, for example, the amount of gray matter in specific area, the volume of brain area, the connectivity. Today, we can put a person in a scanner before he learns, for example, to make juggling, yeah? And we can see in a few hours or tens of hours how there is an expansion of this part of the brain that deals with coordination, for example. So we did not have these very sophisticated methods. What did we have? Two very anecdotal parts of research done in two different places that somehow, one done in Canada, in McMaster, and one done in my lab. And putting it together led us to some, I would say, speculation, but the story is so fascinating that that somehow we got like we got to think about it more than we would on one case. Usually you want to have a lot of replication, but this is such an extraordinary story. First of all, the story behind Einstein's brain was that on one hand, he was a very modest person, and he didn't want to have a funeral, and he wanted to have his ashes spread without ceremonies. So in this sense, he was, although he was so amazing, he was very modest and didn't want to make a lot of fuss about, you know, his brain and so on and so forth. On the other hand, on some occasion, he mentioned that he's willing to give his brain and body to science. And then when he died in 55, he has his, the guy that did autopsy on his brain kind of decided that this brain is too precious and we shouldn't burn it together with the rest of Einstein's body. So basically, when he was doing the autopsy, he saw his boss interviewing on this, and it's kind of in a very spontaneous decision, decided to put his brain of Einstein in a jar, signed a resignation letter, and disappeared from Princeton and from New York, and just disappeared. And his plan was to study the brain of Einstein. At that time, there was no MRI machines, there was no, and he was kind of stuck. And at some point, he started to consult with specialists. And one of the specialists is Dr. Sandra Whittleson. At the time, before the time of MRI, she had one of the biggest collection in the world of brains and did a lot of comparative. What is shared? For example, just to give you an example, in the border between the touch and the motor system, there is a valley, like a river, that separates this, and it's shared by all the individuals in the world. Yeah. So if you take a person from China, from France, wherever you want, we all have the same sulcus, the same valley, in exactly the same location. It might look, a little bit to the right, a bit to the left, but it's the same. And so the reason he contacted her is because she had the biggest, about over 100 brains that she did a lot of comparative research. And when she started to look on Einstein's brain, she found she couldn't see that it was bigger or smaller. She couldn't look, of course, on the connectivity. But one thing, so he physically, by the way, put the Einstein brain in the truck, in the pickup truck, and drove to Canada, passed the border, and just knocked on her door and said, "I have his brain. Do you want to let's study it together?" But so after a very long study and all the picture, also he took also all the pictures of Einstein's brain before doing the autopsy. What Sandra found is that all the sulci, like this central sulcus and like the lateral sulcus that separate the hearing system from the touch system, so on and so forth, is very similar to all the hundreds of brains she analyzed so far and the brains she had, besides one area in which he was missing one sulcus, and in general have a very unique fingerprint, which is exactly this yellow area, mostly where you see here this end. So this part of the parietal cortex, inferior parietal cortex, was enlarged in Einstein's brain and had missing sulcus, which led Sandra to suggest he had a hyperconnectivity and a bigger representation. And this is the part that deals also with quantity and with math, so that's very interesting. And then when I met Sandra in one of actually in Brain Awareness Week, I was invited to McMaster, among other places, to give a lecture about the research. And we were sitting next to each other in the table and started chatting, and I heard this fascinating story. And she's telling me about this. And right in that month, we were analyzing data, which I didn't mention it, but we were the first lab to map in high resolution using magnetic resonance imaging the body, this map of the body, this homunculus that was found by a Canadian researcher, famous Penfield, in epileptic patients. So we studied healthy patients and able, as I mentioned, to map it in high resolution. But we found also a very interesting map that is activated by both moving the body and being touched in the body, but as you said, also when we imagine the body being moved, or when we imagine our body in relation to 3D space. And that collided with this area that was enlarged in Einstein's brain when me and Sandra started to look on his brain and compare it to our maps. And then it hit me that, and this is a wild speculation. So far what I discussed is hardcore data on one end on case study, what our data is on tens and hundreds of subjects, these maps of the body in relation to space. But one thing, and this is a speculation, but I found it to be a fascinating speculation, besides being very, very good at math, even amazing, but even Einstein confessed there was better mathematicians than him, right? If you read his biographies, which are all fascinating, and he's an incredible life story, when he had to solve some of the most difficult mathematical equations on the private and general theory of relativity, he had to consult with other people that were like even better than him in math, yeah? So, but what Einstein was really unique and very famous in is these Gedanken experiments, these thought experiments. And if you look on his scientific progression and biggest discoveries, a lot of them involved thought experiments that involved his body in relation to space. Yeah. So, for example, he has a very famous experiments, which he imagined himself riding on a light, a ray of light, and try to imagine what will happen when he will go slower than the speed of light, or at the speed of light, everything's supposed to be frozen, and so on and so forth. There is a very famous elevator, his body in relation to the elevation, how space will change when it falls versus, and so on and so forth. So again, this is a wild speculation, but maybe
he himself said that imagination was his most important tool.
True, you know exactly. Yes, the famous quote that imagination is more important, and so on and so forth. So yes, so it was very tempting to make this very wild speculation. I would not put it on on a scientific paper, but I think it's a fascinating thought and idea that maybe this abnormal, and also we don't know what is the cause and what is the effect. It might be that the fact that he developed all this ability to mentally visualize and imagine himself in all these weird situations that we don't imagine, caused to enlarge the brain, or the fact that he didn't have the sulcus also pushed him in this direction. But the fact is that the only place that his gross anatomy, and again, we cannot go into very high details of his gray matter in this area or that area, but the only thing that is unique in his brain, this unique fingerprint from relative to all the brains that Sandra tested and later other people tested, I found it to be like a very interesting, this collides exactly with the brain area that holds, that are used by anyone when he's trying to imagine his self and his body, and also his body in relation to space.
Now let's move our discussion to the current work that the Amedi lab is doing at the Reichman University. Can you give us a brief overview about the subject that you're interested in, and what are your main findings so far?
Right. So what we are finding is that the brain is not organized according to this image. Okay, that's I am a little bit confused. This is the text that still to this day, but I think in a generation or in 10 years, this will not be the image anymore. What we found is that all the brain areas have the capacity to process multiple sensory inputs if the sensory input contain information that is helping the brain to achieve a task. I will give you one very recent example. We all know that we all think that the language and speech, if I would ask you what speech, what type of senses is using mainly, what would you say?
People probably use language a lot, frequently.
Yeah, like so. But which sense and which organ do you use for speech?
Oh, you mean your mouth? Yeah.
So basically, it's a hearing. We think about the ear, right? We hear the language,
and the mouth,
and the mouth produce sound waves, and we perceive them in the ear, and we are supposed to process it in this purple area. So I mentioned just a second ago that if I'm going, first of all of us appreciated it, that during Corona time, it was much more difficult to understand speech without the mouth. So, and we know today that if the mask is covering the mouth, especially if your hearing is a bit lower than the average, or if there is noise in the background, like somebody else is opening the door and entering, or there is some other sounds, suddenly we lose the ability to hear or hear much less good. We are losing about 10 decibels by removing vision. So what we did in the lab, we asked, can we provide hearing to people that have problems with hearing or cannot hear by the sense of touch, okay? And the reason for it is that because, so first of all, it's a big problem. There is more and more people that have hearing problems. I would say hundreds of millions of people have hearing impairment, especially the people get older, uses a lot of headphones and so on and so forth. So It's a big increasing problem. Another thing we know today, and that's very important for people to know, for themselves or for their parents or grandparents, is that if you are having a hearing problem and you are not taking care of it with some solution to gain your communication abilities high, you have tens of % higher chances to develop Alzheimer and dementia. And we study in the lab, what are the causes? Why do we have higher chances to develop dementia and Alzheimer? And part of the reason is that we start to lose connectivity between brain areas that kind of delays the onset of these diseases. So it's a very important problem. So one thing we did in the lab, we created, and another thing that is very interesting is that during evolution, the hearing system developed from the touch system. So you know that we have hairs on our body, and when there is wind, we feel like the touch, but we have hair cells also in our ear, but they move not to light or to touch, they move by the sound wave. So in the lab, we created a two-dimensional structure that is on your fingers, or you can wear it on a bracelet, and is vibrate according to the speech. And what we found is that people can improve their hearing if they are hearing impaired or they have a cochlear implant in less than an hour, in a matter of doubling the ability to understand speech in a noisy environment, or if they have a hearing impairment, just by adding touch interface to help them hear better using vibrations. So that's, for example, one thing we do in the lab. And very interestingly, we also scan the brain of these individuals before they learn to use vibrations to understand speech, and after they learn to use vibration. And we see that this purple area now starts to respond to the different frequency of touch. So
which proves your point that there's an interconnectedness between all the parts of the brain.
Yes.
Now, you also conducted some incredible work on eyesight and music, allowing people to actually understand what is it that is in front of them using sound. Can you elaborate about that a little bit?
Yes, I will just show you, since I will switch to this slide, but you see here, this dashed area, this is Einstein's brain from this 99 paper by Sandra Whittleson. You see this expansion of this part of the brain in Einstein's brain, especially in the left side, relatively to normal individuals. So our interest started from this work of Yuval and Wiesel that said that if you put electrodes here, you are recording visual electric signals that represent vision. But another thing they are very famous for is this concept of critical period. And the concept was that in animals, at least, if you cover the eyes after they are born, if you recover one eye, let's say for a month or 2 months, and then you remove the blindfold, you know, a little bit like Moshe Dayan, yeah? And you do it after the animal was born, this eye, although it's 100% normal, is going to be completely blind for the rest of the animal's life. And on the other hand, if you're going to do it to an adult animal, you put 1 month's blindfold, you remove it, or 2 months or half a year, you remove it after a few hours or days, you see perfectly normal, yeah? So that led, and if you do it for both eyes, you are going to be blind for the rest of your life if you don't get vision during this, what they call critical period. And we had reasons, I won't get into all the details, to we believe, and we have evidence that this is wrong and it's not true in humans. Now, it is very clear that the brain of babies is the most plastic, and every day that passes, we lose some plasticity. But this notion that you must receive the input, so for example, following Yuval and Wiesel work, there is a very quick strong recommendations. So for example, if you are born with a lazy eye and one eye see a different image than the other eye, and the brain develop a situation which is called amblyopia, which is this lazy eye is going to be blind for the rest of the life, is to go and correct it even if the baby is 1 year old. And today, following this line of research, which showed that critical periods are not, and I'm going to share with you how we use music to prove that critical periods are not as stringent as thought. Actually, there is no critical period. You can recover vision in any year. And today there is, for example, a collaboration with another visionary from Genius 100, Dr. Tabin, which is doing amazing cataract removal for blind people. Most of the people don't have the cataract from birth, but some have. And we now see that when these cataracts are removed, the subject can learn to see even if they never saw in the critical period. But we showed, and if you have one eye, this lazy eye, and you do the correction, if you are 40 and this eye never saw, it was blind for 40 years, people can still, with a lot of rehab, learn to see even in the age of 40. So this tells us that using these hidden connections between the senses, we can actually, and using rehab and using technology, we can at any age work on the brain as much as we can go to the gym at any age. Yeah, we are less good every year that passes, but there is always a way to recover it.
And you applied that by using music. And I think that the most fascinating part of that research is that you learned something about people that were born blind. So there's a difference between people that were not born blind and people that were born blind.
Right. So I'm going to jump to this part as you mentioned it, but I'm just showing you here these touch devices that we develop in this special three-dimensional ambisonic room that help people to improve their hearing in a matter of less than 1 hour. In the case of blind, it was much more complex, and we took inspiration from dolphins and bats. And dolphins and bats are a very interesting story. They develop during tens of thousands of years of evolution to have two systems, one that operates when there is light and one that operates in darkness or in difficult visual cases. So, you know, there is this saying, blind as a bat. This is wrong. Bats are not blind. They have two systems. When there is a light entering the cave, for example, they use vision to localize what is prey and what is the rock and how to navigate. The night is coming, they operate this system that work with a lot of sounds at the same time, the sonar. They send several sounds at the same time and then receive it and build a three-dimensional, very accurate map of the world. And then that was the first time, by the way, all the years I separated my love of music and playing in jazz bands and research. I said, I don't want to study music. I don't want to research it. But when it hit me that there are animals that can see with music and with sounds, I said, okay, this is the first time that I really wanted to combine music and brain research in my scientific problem. And what we did was we developed an algorithm that is called iMusic that takes images from a camera, convert them into 15 sounds that are played over a period of 2-3 seconds. During these 2-3 seconds, the brain of the blind processes these 15 sounds and build a picture that is 1,500 pixels resolution. And then what you see here is Chamutal. This is, by the way, a live demo in front of 10,000 people at the APAC conference, at the Innovation Showcase. You see that we are scrambling the host is scrambling the location of the red apple and the Sprite and the Coke, and the blind can see the image of the color, of the shape, and so on and so forth, and act upon them as if she was having a visual image and not a sound image.
You also discovered that the brain, the part of the brain that recognizes color and vision, is actually active among people that were born blind.
Right, exactly. So, for example, we found that I just want to show this very short clip of
please do.
Another congenitally blind individual. It's in Hebrew, but the picture is worth more than the words. Picking up her shoes in the room, yeah, for the first time. Here is the glasses, here is the sound, and here is the shoes. Yeah, so the beauty of MRI, is that now we can put these individuals before they are learning to create, to understand the objects around them and the 3D space in the MRI, and after they learn it. And the picture of what you see is very interesting and intriguing. When you are putting people that don't know how to build this very complex image from these 15 sounds, and if we will have time, I will share with you just a gist of how can you draw images using sounds. That's a very interesting topic in itself, because people like, how can you teach person to build a three-dimensional image based on music and on sounds? But let's assume it's possible. And as you saw from the image, from the videos, it is possible. And by the way, we had over 200 people that came to our lab over the course of the last 15 years and learned this language. And we didn't find one person, congenitally blind, late blind, or sighted, that couldn't learn the language. Some learned it faster, some slower, but everyone can learn it. So it's a universal ability of the brain to transfer information between the senses. And the same was true to the touch device that help you hear better. Every person that entered the lab immediately able to improve his hearing based on vibration.
Amazing. And at that point, Amir, I know you have a lot more to say, but we have some very, very interesting questions coming in from.
So let me just recap let me recap for 3 minutes, just showing you the image of what happened in the brain, because this is, as a scientist, this is the most important part. What you see here is a group average of congenitally blind. Before we teach them to analyze the sounds and build images using music, there is activity on the brain, part of the brain that is supposed to process music and sound, which is normal. But look what happened when we are putting people that are analyzing these images and never saw in their life. What you see here is that the activity spreads, and when they recognize the face or read this word or recognize a tool, the entire visual system lights up. So the information flow from the hearing system to this intermediate area, and when they actually build the image, the activity is in their visual system, although this visual system never saw. And it's even more than this. There is some brain areas that are specialized for things that are especially important for us as humans. So when we let them recognize faces, like this Marilyn Monroe image that I can show you in a second, they have activation of their face area. When they read using our device or using Braille, they activate the visual reading center. When they recognize tools, it's the tool area. So we actually reactivate areas that were sleeping or not active or supposed to be degenerated for the visual process for 60 years. And now they do their original function using a different sensory modality, which is this music rendering of sound. So I will stop here. I have a lot of other examples. We will have time.
Obviously, these amazing findings have huge applications in real life for people that suffer from either blindness or reduced eyesight, and people that have hearing problems. We have so many questions here, Professor Amedi. I don't think we're going to have time for all of them, but the first question that is actually a general question is, what is hereditary in terms of what we define as exceptional capabilities? So you spoke about Einstein's brain. What is hereditary? Is genius hereditary, for example?
Okay, that's a wonderful question. I can talk about these questions for hours, but I will try to summarize my thoughts on it in two, 3 minutes, because this is actually one of the main research topics in the last 20 years in my lab. Nature versus nurture. What you are born with and what can you do with later in life. Yeah. And I want to say that what we show is that what you are born with is much less important than what happened later in life. And you can reprogram your brain at any age to change dramatically and possess new abilities, new functions, even new senses. I won't have time to get into this line of research. So we think today that what happened after birth is much more important than what you are born with. Now, very interestingly, in the last several years, I started to think that the same type of revolution, I will give you another example. There is the concept of stem cells, yeah? That cells can develop to any other type of cells when you are young. And what we found in our research is that, for example, in early blind people, brain area that is the first and most important station, the V1 station, which is the station that Hubel and Wiesel studied the most and recognizes the main visual center in our cerebral cortex, is turning into a memory center in people that are born blind. So, and they have superior memory capabilities. So brain area change completely function, just like cell cells. Instead of being a heart cell, it's being now a blood vessels or brain tissue. So the same with brain areas. We were the first to show that the primary brain area can turn into to be part of the memory system, which is completely very far from it in the hippocampus, and support superior memory abilities. Another very important point I want to mention here is the same happens, and that's a very, I think, I love this question and this topic. The same happened in genetics. You know, in the 70s, you know, after the amazing work of Watson and Crick and the Nobel Prize and so on, the emphasis was that the most important part is the genetics and what you are born with, right? This is the code. This is what you are born with. Today, even in genetics, we say that epigenetics, there is actually the environment and what you experience and what you learn and stress and all this other stuff are actually determining what will be decoded from your genetics or and what not. And today the general estimates, and this is amazing research, by the way, from Hebrew University, Professor Sider, that I hope he will get the Nobel Prize he already got the Wolf Prize. He found the mechanisms in which the environment can switch on and off genes. And today we know that 80% of the information is this epigenetic, what happened after you're born and by your environment and what you experience and what you learn. And 20%, that's a rough estimate, is what you are born with. So it's a huge revolution in genetics. And I think what we found in neuroscience mimic it or agrees with it to a very large extent on a completely different system and scale.
Well, that was a wonderful question from Tony Aspler. We have another great question, and then we'll have to wrap up. We're running out of time. Guys, Lurie is asking,
wow, what time passed like crazy. That was like this.
Yeah, I know. Time flies when you're having fun. There's a wonderful question here about the connection between imagination and intuition. And Giles Lurie is quoting Einstein as saying, sometimes I know I'm right, but I don't know why. What is the connection between imagination and intuition?
I will be very brief here because I don't want to pretend I know everything about the brain. It's as complex as our universe. And I didn't study this topic. I would say that imagination is not one thing. We have many imagination systems, and we are very different in our imagination capabilities. And this is something that people don't appreciate. For example, in visual imagination, you have people like me that have very poor visual imagination. I have a wonderful audio imagination, by the way. I can imagine a whole tunes of music, I cannot imagine even one color, by the way. And then you have other people that can replay 5 minutes clip in their mind eye. And we see it in MRI, like in live, like while they are imagining it. And so there, we have many imaginations, and the connection between all these imagination systems and intuition is very complex. I'm not sure I even know how to study it.
Well, you know, we have such a long list. I just wanted to say to all our participants, we will send your questions to Professor Amedi, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some answers because your questions are amazing. I just wanted to thank all the special
I'm happy
people.
to stay here also right now. If anyone wants, I would stay here, and everyone
After the
wants
program
to ask.
ends, okay.
Yes, yes, with pleasure.
I just would like to thank all the people here. We have Amir, Professor Amedi, you were able to draw people from all over the world. We have people here from Hong Kong. We have people here from, of course, the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Canada, from Vancouver. We have people here from Toronto, from Montreal, from Israel. We have people here from all over the world, from my cousin here from Netanya is here. I mean, it was, I could have had this conversation, you know, we could have gone for 3 hours here. I'd like at this point to thank you very much for
enriching absolutely our lives, pleasure,
for educating us. And I'd like to turn it back to our dear CEO, Hillary, please.
Thank you so much, Amir and Ido. Ido's right. We could have gone on for hours. It's absolutely fascinating. And I just have to say, Giles Lurie is a former colleague of mine from the UK. So thank you for answering his question. I just wanted to give us some closing remarks here with a special thank you to Chief Community Officer Helen Hatzis, Chief Technology Officer Wayne Viner, who both made it possible from behind the screen, and to Scott Rose, Executive Director of New York Festival Advertising Awards, our partner in the Genius 100 Inspiration Awards, and to Regina Sheridan of Libra Social for the extra promotion. Genius 100 Foundation is a 501c3 and registered charity in Canada, and we want to thank all of our supporters. Without your commitment, we could not create the impact and fulfill our promise. As promised, we have some terrific news to share. First, the next Genius of series will be the Genius of Technology on February 10th with Genius 100 visionary Don Tapscott, interviewed by Scott Shea, who's the founder and chairman of Signature Bank. So please do not miss this one. It's going to be, if it's anywhere near as extraordinary as what Amir just presented, we've got a lot to share. You can register on our website and on the link that's been sent around via eBlast. Also, we have a very exciting new partnership. This is truly official breaking news. On this coming Monday, the official news will come out that Genius 100 will launch a partnership with the Festival of Diaspora, the Aspen Institute, Project on Belonging, and the Tulsa Innovation Labs, and other leading organizations to launch an event that will host more than 100 industry executives and change makers from across the Americas at its inaugural convening in San Juan on February 23rd through 26th. On February 24th, Thursday, February 24th, Genius 100 will be presenting the keynote address on the future of education with a special tribute to our G100 visionary in spiritus, Sir Ken Robinson. Ido Aharoni, who just our ambassador here, will also be presenting, I believe, on Friday the 25th. Speakers for this event and attendees will be a diverse cross-sector group, including government, nonprofit, philanthropic, and corporate leaders, social entrepreneurs, academics, and dignitaries. If anyone would like to attend, please just reach out to us at Genius 100. The next Genius 100 2022 Genius 100 Visionary will be announced at the Festival of Diaspora on February 24th. The New York Festival's awards will be announcing our judges next week. And the gift of site promotion with Love You More in partnership with Himalayan Cataract Project is still ongoing. So please check your eBlast for that to participate. So thank you to everyone for joining us. If you have any questions or want to know more about anything you heard today or anything that we've got going on, please just reach out to us on our website, or I believe you have our emails at this point. And thank you again for coming. And we're going to turn this back over to Amir and Helen, and I don't know if Ido's still around, but if you want to keep going on the dialogue, let's do it.
Sure, I'm happy to stay on. Hillary, thank you so much for that. I'm happy to stay on and to record all of the answers. I mean, we still have the majority of our audience here. But yeah, why don't we just get into it? So we answered the first question. Amir, we have a question here. Let's see here. Oh, there was a thank you for an amazing presentation from Don Whites. Thank you, Don. Okay, so how would Professor Amedi explain which areas of the brain are responsible? Sorry if this has already been covered. For people understanding and remembering personal stories that they hear from others.
So just to understand the question more.
Which part of the brain is responsible for people understanding and remembering like personal stories that they hear?
Right. So this is the what is called episodic memory, which means like things that either happen to us or that other people telling us. So this part of the brain, which is related, is called the hippocampus, but of course there is other structures. What the hippocampus is really important is in consolidating information and memories, and this kind of stories, like episodic stories of us, of other people telling us, and moving them from hearing them or experiencing them into long-term memory. This process is called consolidation. How do we know that the hippocampus is responsible to it? Because there was a very interesting case of a person called HM, which have epileptic seizures that were very extreme, into a level that he had them several times a day at some days, which to some people can even cause a wish to die, you know, like so difficult. So in his case, the focus of his epilepsy was in the hippocampus. And when they removed his hippocampus, he would be able to talk with you, and it looks like completely normal, or with his doctors, but he couldn't consolidate anything that somebody told him or that he experienced himself into long-term memory. So the doctors had to introduce themselves every time in the same day. After several years, one of his parents died, and they announced him. They were very sad, and in the next day he forgot it. So he would try again. So at some point they realized there is no point in telling him, you know, this.
Right.
On the other hand, things he learned in childhood, like that are more implicit memory, like learning to ride a bike, he learned how he didn't lose it. So and factual things like when did the stock market crashed? It was in 2009. He remembered it. He could retrieve it from memory, but not his episodic memory. He couldn't remember anything that happened after the removal of his hippocampus. And just like one last very interesting bit of information, what we found is that the hippocampus is connected in congenitally blind individual. They have an extra memory area in their visual system, and it's connected to this hippocampus. And like the visual system transformed, like stem cells, like I said, from being a visual to memory system. This was like 2 Nature Neuroscience paper we published in 2003, 2004. And we even could interrupt the activity in this brain area using something that's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, in which we interrupt the retinal activity in a given brain area, and we hamper their ability to retrieve things from their memory.
That's so interesting. But even with certain things like music and certain things that affect us emotionally, we have like, it's like a trigger for that memory point. Like, do you find that as well? Like,
absolutely, because you have this information stored somewhere, and then anything that could elevate the electrical activity in the network that support memory can help you to retrieve something. And it can be even like as strange as not thinking about something for 20 years, and suddenly something trigger
pops up.
It can pop up. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a question here from Karen Rosen Adelman, and this is an interesting question. I mean, they're all interesting questions, but this is specifically revolved around sports and protocols and helmets and concussions and the effect on the brain. Do you want to touch a little bit on that?
Well, I'm not a big expert on sport, but I got to be like, I'm not an expert by doing research on sport, but I became like half expert because this topic fascinates me. And there is an amazing podcast called the Huberman Lab podcast, and they talk a lot about protocols and about the effect of nutrition, of sports, and there is amazing research done on it, even on triggering of longevity genes that extend our life expectancy, that are triggered by, for example, doing sports every day, or by intermittent fasting, like doing this. And I myself started to do this intermittent fasting protocol after reading this amazing work by David Sinclair from Harvard. So there is a lot of connection, and really sports, unless you are getting concussion in your brain, like this NFL and this rugby players, so they hurt their brain. So of course there is damage and increasing chances of degenerative disease. But if you are doing sports in a safe way, it's only have good effects on your body. And if we mentioned dementia and Alzheimer, which are a big another pandemic, so we have several pandemics going on. One relates to stress and depression post-corona, one for hearing impairment and the relation to degenerative disease, and the third is dementia and Alzheimer. Then there is very, very clear data showing that daily or 4 or 5 times a week sport, it can be moderate, can have a similar effect like learning a second language when you're elderly, protect you, give you extra 3, 4, 5 years of healthy brain, and delays or completely protection from brain degeneration. So
that's great. Okay.
Another voice into supporting this.
Yeah, of course, which is much needed. This question comes from Dharma Lusert. He's a grade 8 student from Palms Middle School in Los Angeles. And it's a handwritten note, Amir, if you can see that. I don't know. Oh, no,
so cool.
Yeah. So he said, meaning you said with sound, you can see 1,000, and I believe it says 1,500 pixels. But what if you have aphantasia? Did I say that right? Aphantasia?
Wow, what a wonderful question. Wonderful question.
But he added another point. He said, and then he has a little arrow pointing down to a note that says, meaning the inability to picture images in your mind.
I have to tell you a few things. One, I am a big advocate for communicating science to youngsters, and there is a beautiful paper, a journal that is called Frontiers for the Young Mind. Google it up, and we can write it up.
Okay.
That the papers are submitted so that guys like, actually it's from 10 and up, but with such a fantastic question, also for this age, is definitely qualified. And the papers are reviewed by anonymously, both professors and kids. So it will be very communicatively. And there is a lot of amazing journals, including there is a paper in which we describe how can you learn to see with sound. And now we have a new paper coming up about learning to possess super senses or hearing with touch and so on and so forth with Dr. Amber Maimon from my lab. But to go back to this question, this shows how much anyone can come up with a new experiment that was not done. Sometimes students come to me and say, everything was studied already. But no, there is so many things that we still mysterious. And this wonderful question, we are going to perform a research on it because it's a wonderful question. Let me clarify what was the name of the kid?
Dharma.
Dharma. So first, let's say what is aphantasia. I have something that is almost aphantasia. Aphantasia is what I described, the inability to look at something, let's say the cell phone, close my eyes and now see it in my mind's eye. Like there is people that are super visual imagination, aphantasia, they cannot. By the way, one of the head of one of the heads of Intel in Israel contacted me because they have this condition, and we started a dialogue. And my prediction is that the visual system is not tightly linked into vision per se, and we have a lot. I show you a little bit of evidence into it, but into the ability to create a mental image of space and the objects around it. So first of all, me as someone that almost have a fantasia, I can tell you that I learned and I can visualize using sounds, not as good as the blind, but pretty good or okay. So it means that people with aphantasia probably can, but we will conduct now, and I would invite this colleague from Intel that have aphantasia, and she wanted to go into the MRI scanner and train her on seeing with the sound and see whether her visual system operates. That would be another way to prove what we showed with the congenitally blind, that the visual system, when you create a visual image, they for sure have aphantasia because they cannot visualize anything visual because they never saw visual. So this is one evidence. But let's say somebody that saw all their life but cannot imagine, but if they imagine the shapes and the locations using the sounds, my prediction, it will activate the visual system. We still didn't test it, so this is going to be one of our next experiments. So
Wow.
Thank you very much for this question.
What a fantastic question. And I was just
Amazing,
recording
amazing.
it so I can send it right away to the middle school. Yeah, that's
Phenomenal.
wonderful. Thank you.
Maybe this is a good time to
Sure.
to
Yeah, we can end it
end
here.
this,
And what I can do, Amir, I can share some of the questions that we didn't get to. If you have time.
pleasure, and
to
and I would answer by email with great pleasure.
That would be
Thank you.
wonderful. So yeah, at this point, I just want to thank everyone for, like, there's still quite a few people who stayed on. Thank you so much. I see that there are still questions. We will send those to Amir. And when we disseminate this broadcast via email, we'll be sure to include the questions. Hi, Hillary. That was a wonderful session. Amir, thank you so much for your time.
It was such a pleasure, and the big attendance is because of the hard work of the Genius team. And it's a huge pleasure to be working with you guys, both highly professional and super nice individuals, beautiful souls. Thank you very much. And thank you for hosting me for the first webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Amir. Bye, everyone. Till next time.
Bye, everybody. Thank you kindly. All right. And I guess we'll just call it a day. Thank you. See you later.